Okay, so you've probably seen him around, right?
Yeah.
Like as Cal Jacobs in Euphoria,
Right.
or way back as McSteamy
Yeah, Grey's Anatomy.
on Grey's Anatomy, and
Sure.
this is Eric Dane that we're talking about.
Yep. Yep.
And today on DRM News Global,
Yeah.
we're going to be talking about some news about him.
Big news, yeah.
That has come out and
Right.
understandably gotten a lot of attention.
Right. So this edition of DRM News Global really is going to be a deep dive into Eric Dane and his recent announcement about his diagnosis with ALS.
Exactly. And, we've got reports from People Magazine
Yep.
And other outlets, too,
Sure.
that have, shared the statement. And so what we're going to do is, we're going to really try to understand, the core of this news.
Exactly.
And what Dane has said, what ALS is, and what this might mean moving forward, all while, keeping it clear and focused.
Yeah. Well, let's start with Eric Dane's own words.
Yeah.
He released a statement expressing gratitude for the support from his family.
Yeah.
As they navigate this new journey. And I think one of the things that struck me, and maybe you too, is that he's very clear that he wants to keep working.
Yeah. It really speaks to his character.
Right.
Doesn't it? That he's like, I'm so fortunate that I'm able to keep working, and I look forward to, getting back on set next week for Euphoria.
I mean, and Euphoria season 3 is slated to begin production.
Yeah, on Monday, April 14th.
On Monday, April 14th. So, the timing really kind of underscores, his commitment to his work.
Right.
And of course, he asked for privacy for himself and his family during this time, which,
of course,
we should all respect.
Absolutely. So before we dive into the specifics of ALS, I think it's worth just taking a moment to kind of acknowledge the
breadth of his career.
Breadth of his career, yeah.
He's
so well known.
He's so well known for Cal Jacobs in Euphoria.
Yeah.
A very compelling performance.
Right, and to so many people, he'll always be Dr. Mark Sloan.
Dr. Mark Sloan.
On Grey's Anatomy.
Right.
139 episodes.
Yeah, 139 episodes.
Of that show.
Really cemented his place in popular television.
Yeah, and beyond that, he's also done a bunch of other stuff.
Right, yeah.
Like he was Jason Dean in Charmed.
Right. Captain Tom Chandler.
Yeah, Captain Tom Chandler in The Last Ship.
In The Last Ship.
Yeah, and then a bunch of films too that I'm sure, people have seen. Marley and Me.
Yeah.
Valentine's Day. Burlesque. Yeah,
he's been a constant figure in entertainment for a while.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And of course, he has a family too.
Yeah.
He's married to the actress and model Rebecca Gayheart.
Right.
And they have 2 daughters.
Yeah.
Billy Beatrice, who is 15, and Georgia Geraldine, who is 13.
Yeah.
And, so this news, understandably, has a huge impact on their family.
Yeah, absolutely. So that leads us to kind of the core of what we want to talk about today, which is, ALS.
ALS.
And, you might know this.
You might know it as Lou Gehrig's disease.
As Lou Gehrig's disease.
Yeah, that's what a lot of people here in the States call it. And it is the most common form of what's called motor neuron disease, or MND.
MND.
And MND is kind of a broader term.
Right. So MND encompasses a bunch of different
That's an umbrella term.
Conditions, but they all have this.
They have a similar characteristic.
Yeah.
Right. So according to the NHS, MND includes several conditions where there's like a premature degeneration of the motor nerves. These are the neurons, sometimes called neurons, but they control muscles.
Okay.
And what's interesting is that nearly 90% of people with MND, the form of MND they have is ALS.
Okay.
So ALS is like the most common.
So like under the umbrella of MND.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, ALS is the most common type.
Okay, got it. So ALS itself is described as a rare and degenerative disease.
Yes.
And so when we say degenerative, what does that mean?
Right. That's a good question.
What does that look like?
So it means that the disease causes like a progressive paralysis of the muscles.
Okay.
And the initial signs can be really subtle. So somebody might just notice like a twitch or like a weakness in a limb.
Yeah.
Like an arm or a leg.
Okay.
Or maybe a change in their speech.
Okay.
Like it gets slurred.
Okay, so it starts with these kind of like...
seemingly minor issues.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it progresses from there.
Okay.
And the disease really targets these nerve cells in the brain and spinal cord that control voluntary muscles.
Okay.
So these are the muscles we use to move.
Yeah.
And over time, this damage, leads to a gradual loss of the ability to do everyday things.
Yeah.
Things we take for granted, like speaking clearly, swallowing, walking, and eventually even breathing on your own.
Yeah.
So think of it like this. You've got these motor nerves.
Right.
They're like electrical wires that send signals to your muscles.
Yeah.
And with ALS, those wires, they start to fray. They lose their ability to send those signals.
Okay. That's a really good way to visualize it.
To understand it. Yeah.
And the reports, talk about this difficult reality of treatment.
Yeah. And this is the really hard part.
Yeah.
There is currently no cure for ALS.
Okay.
The treatments that do exist are really focused on, managing symptoms and maybe slowing the progression.
Yeah.
But there's no way to stop it or reverse it.
That's tough.
Yeah.
And the sources also talked about kind of a typical life expectancy,
Yeah, that's something that people want to know.
Yeah, and so what does that generally look like?
So the Muscular Dystrophy Association says that the average life expectancy following a diagnosis is about 3 to 5 years.
Okay.
But, and this is super important to understand, this is just an average.
Right.
The course of ALS is different for everybody.
Right.
Some people live with the disease for a lot longer.
Right.
Like a decade or more.
Yeah. So it's not a definitive...
It's not a hard and fast timeline.
Right. So, one of the reports that we looked at mentioned Eric Dane's wife, Rebecca Gayhart.
Yeah.
And referenced her, previous dismissal of divorce rumors.
Right.
Did that source, offer any more information about
their current situation?
Yeah, or, her perspective on the diagnosis.
So the article you're talking about really focused on Rebecca Gayhart's public dismissal of any renewed divorce filings.
Okay.
It does confirm that they are still married.
Okay.
But it doesn't give us any new statements or quotes from her.
Okay.
Where she's talking about Eric Dane's diagnosis.
Okay.
Or, their relationship in light of this news.
Okay.
Really, the focus of that article was just to say, hey, they're still married.
Okay, so we know that they're a family navigating this together.
Right.
But we don't have any specific statements.
Yeah, we don't have any specific statements from Rebecca Gayhart
okay.
about the diagnosis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think what's important for us is to really stick to, the information that's directly related to Eric Dane's announcement.
Yeah.
And, what we know about ALS from, medical sources.
Yeah. Okay. So as we kind of wrap up this, edition of DRM News Global, it's clear that, this news about Eric Dane is...
It's significant.
It's significant, yeah.
I mean, given, his career and how well known he is.
Yeah.
An ALS diagnosis presents just immense challenges for anybody.
Right.
And, we talked about how this is a progressive and currently incurable disease.
And so that really underscores, the difficulties ahead for him and his family.
Right.
Yeah.
But, it's really great that in his statement, he seems so strong.
Yeah.
And,
He seems very determined.
And grateful for his family's support and, looking forward to
continuing his work.
Yeah.
It's really
it's really encouraging.
Encouraging, yeah. And it prompts us to kind of think about the bigger picture here,
So
and this affects
this is something that affects
so many people.
So many people, way beyond the spotlight of celebrity.
Yeah, it shines a light on
these neurodegenerative diseases and, the impact they have on people and families.
Yeah.
And it also really shows us how important it is to keep doing research. Right.
To try to understand, treat, and eventually find cures
Right.
for conditions like ALS.
Absolutely. And maybe, as you've been listening today, you might think about, how you can...
Yeah, how can we all
support
and raise awareness.
And raise awareness.
For people affected by ALS.
Yeah, for folks affected by...
Other similar conditions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening.
And we'll see you next time.
Yeah, we'll see you next time for another deep dive on DRM News Global.
Take care.